something, yeah, a stick or some way of making it legal.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we are Planning Commission doing a bed and breakfast workshop. Today is March 12th, 2024. It's 5 o'clock. We're in the auditorium. This has been something we've been needing to do for a while because we've had quite a few questions and thoughts, I think, thrown around for a while. So, Anne, I'm going to let you start since it's kind of your baby. Just as an FYI, we'll be doing, as of right now, we'll be doing a workshop today. We'll be doing another one at 5 o'clock prior to our April meeting, and then another one at 5 o'clock prior to our May meeting, as of right now. And it'll be on the same topic. Okay. So, go ahead.
So this workshop pertains to bed and breakfast in residential areas only at this point on this workshop. We're under a moratorium right now. I have not gotten, I don't know, Kyle, if you have this, a current list of all the bed and breakfasts that are licensed as of this year.
So I did get that list from Ida. She has a current list, and then I am working on old lists, trying to see which ones are still operating, that she does not have that information, trying to update that as well.
Okay. So I guess the first question, is there a need for more?
Okay. Yeah, I know when we did a study, I guess it was 2 years ago, we did a study and we found that 31% of all the available housing was tourist lodging. I think that's what we determined. And that's why we did the moratorium, because we were concerned with rental space for non-tourists. And so I know that was the number. It's kind of our level there. And I don't know if that number is now increased or decreased, but I don't know of any closures of bed and breakfast or tourist lodging.
Sunnyside Inn is no longer in business on Ridgeway.
Okay.
Has that been confirmed with them?
The letter came back unanswered.
Okay.
When Glenna was there, I don't even know where the person is. I don't think they have a license. They shouldn't have a license. I'm trying to think if there were I don't think. I know there right now 2 have sold.
Okay.
One transferred to CUP, the other's a grandfather. And right now there are 2 bed and breakfasts, I think, for sale. Yours and Hidden Springs. That fell through.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there are some in commercial areas, but I think in residential we have 2 that are for sale. We have numerous tourist lodging that's for sale.
I know.
Gwen.
Can you come
Come on
up?
up.
Yeah, can you come up to the mic?
So you're talking about,
Just
Put that-
pull it down.
Yeah, pull it. There you go.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Is the blue light on? Is the blue light on? Push it.
it's
There
on.
we go.
Okay,
There
good.
you go. Yeah.
So you're talking about, huh?
Name and address.
Oh, Gwen Bennett, 11 Hillside Avenue. So you're talking about like an attrition rate of B&Bs. And so, for example, Crescent Cottage sold as a single-family home there on Spring Street. The lodging across the street from me, what do I want to call it, 2 Hillside, that just sold to a private family. And I don't know if they'll be renting out or not, but that could be attrition. There was the inn at, Rose Hall sold when Zoe's family sold it as to a private individual, but she re-upped the CUP last August. But Kyle's looking in to see whether or not they've been operating. You know, they've been remodeling but not operating. So my suggestion to you was to track these buildings and let them have an attrition rate and not renew. You know, of course you have to respect the grandfather, usage. But if it goes back to a private home and then they come back and want a CUP, treat that as a brand-new one and decide as a city if you want more brand-new ones.
Yeah, I think one of our issues with grandfather is that I know we had one just recently that sold that is a grandfather, and they did not come in to do any paperwork that I know of yet, but they are aware of the fact that they have to do certain things in order to keep that grandfather.
Right.
So, so those are some of the things that I know that, obviously we have to keep track of.
Well, especially if they're new people, they don't realize
Right.
what they should be doing. Another thing is, back in the 90s, or, it's probably the 90s, a municipal league attorney told us that we can't say the phrase, "we don't need another." You have to legislate this from a different angle. For some reason, you can't just say, "oh, I think we have enough now." And you might check that with your attorney. But at the time, it meant that you had to make rules, and that's when we got the no more lodgings. We did things like that when we were doing this kind of trying to keep businesses out of the residential neighborhood.
Right.
Because I've been watching it since the 1990s, and it has just gone on and on. And we really should preserve our residential neighborhoods for the residents, for the ambiance. And part of that ambiance is allowing quirky people to live here. That's why people come here, because they want to be part of this. So I know you have the housing issue, and that's why things are turning now. Now we don't have enough housing for residents, and so that's the kind of thing that is facing you. So good luck. It's a hard road to hoe, but my hope is that we won't allow any new bed and breakfast, and we'll try to wait for them to have an attrition rate. Anyway, thank you for letting me butt in.
Thank you, Gwen.
Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah.
And I would have to agree with a lot of what she said.
I do too.
I don't know if I know we've been talking about this for a long time. I mean, I've been here for 10 years, and this has been a topic, as far as what is a bed and breakfast and who's doing it the way we think they should be doing it, who isn't doing it the way we think they should be doing it. And while I think we probably have quite a few, obviously I own one, but I live on property. So I think at the very least, even though it says in code that there has to be someone that lives there, I know we've had issues in the past and some questions as to whether or not people really are. And if they do have a manager, is that person really managing it, or is that person just a long-term renter? So, in my opinion, I think if you run it correctly, it can be a good thing. And you do become a resident of the neighborhood. So, kind of going back to what I said last meeting, is that if they are allowed, I really think that the only ones that we should allow, they have to go through an inspection, and there has to be living quarters. I mean, they have to show living quarters. Because otherwise, you just have a tourist lodging. As far as going with the breakfast thing,
They have to go with the breakfast thing.
The what?
They have to do breakfast. It's a bed and breakfast.
I understand what you're saying.
And we got a couple that, when we had no longer tourist lodging, came to us for a bed and breakfast, and they got it, and they don't serve breakfast.
I know.
They use it as a tourist lodging.
Yep.
I'm not really sure what the answer is there, because I just don't think that we have the manpower to do code enforcement.
I will agree with you, and I know Jacob is not going to be looking to see what they're doing for breakfast. And we've had this conversation before, that what is a breakfast? If breakfast is the most important thing, and we then say, we don't care if they serve Pop-Tarts, it's really not that important. the most important thing is that somebody's living there, I think.
Well, they
Or a
could-
neighborhood residential neighborhood.
They can serve Pop-Tarts, that's up to the consumer, but they have to state that breakfast is served, whether it's a Pop-Tart, whether it's a continental breakfast, whether it's a croissant and a cup of coffee, or if it's a full sit-down breakfast. They have to advertise it in the price.
Okay, well, and then there's the next thing is when an audit is done on a property, who is auditing it and who is proving or not proving whether or not they're doing a breakfast? And so your issue becomes, are you looking at every website and saying, this one says they're doing a breakfast, this one says they're not doing a breakfast, or this one just doesn't say anything? So I think it really comes down to manpower, and is that really the most important thing? So, hey, Ida.
Do you care? May I ask a
No,
question?
go ahead.
Okay, so on the breakfast thing, yes, they do have to serve breakfast.
According
but-
to our ordinance now, yes.
Yeah, but there's nothing about advertising if they serve
Right.
breakfast. Would that be something that needs to be cleaned up in code? If you
It
do
could.
if you guys do decide that's something, the breakfast portion is important to you. I mean, either way, if you wanted to change the name of it, that would be a way to make sure they have an ownership on site.
Right.
And not have the breakfast portion. But if you're calling it a bed and breakfast, they have to serve breakfast, but we need to clean up that part of code that says they have to serve breakfast. If we're auditing based on how they're advertising,
Right.
and then that's going to get into where do they advertise that? Do they have to advertise it where? Do they have to advertise it everywhere? Do they have to advertise it on their signs? Or is
Right.
it just when they book, there's a disclaimer? Or that would be things that I think would be smart to look into.
Yeah, and we have talked about that before over the years, whether or not they have to call themselves a bed and breakfast. They have to state that they're serving a breakfast, all of that. And we can change an ordinance. Whether or not we'll get enough votes on the city council side is another story. We may or we may not. But the question really comes down to who's auditing it and how are you auditing it? Are you, if our litmus is going to be, we don't care what you serve, you can serve an orange if you say that that's a breakfast, then I guess, then it comes down to, is it false advertising? Because, as a city, they're representing a business license, they're representing the city, and then somebody comes in and, they've got an apple or an orange there for breakfast, so, to me, you're either doing it or you're not doing it. And who's auditing it or who isn't auditing it, and to what extreme are we going to go to make sure that it's done?
Is it okay? Do you want me to go over the process of when someone comes to me to get a bed and breakfast license, business license?
I think that's on our meeting.
Is that, well, it's CUPs in general,
Yeah.
but I mean, I can talk about it now or I can talk about it when I'm on the agenda during the meeting. It's up to you guys.
Well, I'm curious about what you do on grandfathers.
Yeah, so I'll just tell you the general process for bed and breakfast specific. I did want to get something typed up with the bed and breakfast rules. I was going to do that in this cycle, but then Kyle was out and I didn't feel comfortable with the whole you have to serve breakfast, do they have to advertise? That's not cleaned up a code. So I didn't want to just pull the trigger on that without consulting Kyle first. So that's something we can look at for the next licensing cycle. If you guys want to get together the rules for me, or I have pretty much all of them in code I can type up and me and Kyle can work it out. But as far as when they come in for a new business license, the first thing I'm going to check is the zoning. If they're commercial, of course, there's they can go ahead and get the business license if they have their a certificate of occupancy that they bring in for the fire marshal and building inspector. As far as residential, I do check to see if they're on the legal nonconforming list. If they're on the legal nonconforming list, then I'm going to check their business licensing. How have they been licensed in the last 6 months? If they haven't been licensed in the last 6 months, then I'm going to tell them you haven't been operating in the last 6 months. So that legal nonconforming use is no longer valid per code. And I did have one that they had a good cause, so they came here and did that, but they were required to do that before they obtained their business license. Right. And then when they receive their business license, I give them the CAPC tax permit form. A lot of times I'll tell them, hey, you can fill it out and drop it in their mailbox, or you can fill it out, give it to me, and I'll put it in their mailbox. And then we are going to start getting the process over where I'm cleaning up the business license list with current information, getting that over to them, and then I'm just going to start sending them a monthly report of new businesses to make sure that they've gone and got their tax permit. So we can clean up that portion of the process that was kind of having that disconnect before.
So when you transfer a grandfather, prior to transferring the grandfather, do you check with CAPC to make sure that all the taxes have been paid in full? So
I haven't got to one where I've had to go that far yet. That is probably that's something I will do in the future, but the previous...
So it's actually 180 days. So it wouldn't be, okay.
Which is 6 months.
Right, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that's what I do. I do check. I would check with CAPC. I haven't got anyone. They've either been not licensed in the, they've usually been not licensed in the 6 months, or they've been in good standing and all of that. So that is something that I will check in the future. Every single one that I've got has been one that I know has been in good standing.
Okay.
Or they didn't have a business license or anything, so I went ahead and got that done.
Is there anything in code that there are fines associated with doing business without a business license?
There is. Whether those fines have been imposed in the recent past is a question. Generally, my understanding of it is if you open a business without a business license, if we notify you and you start taking those steps and you're coming to get into compliance, we're educating them. And I don't think imposing fines on that person would be fair. I would look into, of course, that would be on the enforcement side of, I would be, if I was asking them time and time again to get a business license and they keep operating, I'm going to hit up Jacob and PD and be like, hey, please do something with this. But luckily, I haven't ran into that yet. Pretty much anyone who's not had a business license, I've reached out and said, hey, you gotta get in compliance. And they've been like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, or whatever. And we get them into compliance pretty quickly.
Okay.
But yes, I do make sure they are in good standing before they obtain their next license. I haven't ran into one yet, but I've only been here a little over a year, so.
thank you.
Yeah. And they do have to have their certificate of occupancy, meaning their fire marshal and building inspector inspection before they can obtain a license.
Well, I'll just tell you where I am on this. If we've got 15 or 16 or whatever number, I think I would say cap it. And anybody that wants to transfer the CUP or sells illegal non-conforming, we move forward. And if somebody decides not to have a bed and breakfast, at least that opens up a slot if somebody somewhere else wants to do it. I mean, we do, especially on Hillside, we have some big places, and yours too, that I don't know what it would be other than a bed and breakfast,
Right.
unless they've got 10 kids.
Mm,
You know, I don't know what they're
Yeah.
going to do with those properties. I
Yeah.
guess they could turn them into apartments.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
one thing that came up, covenants, subdivision covenances. One of the things that would restrict somebody from putting a tourist lodging or a B&B into a subdivision was that covenants. I know, Kyle,
was back there,
did we,
Kind of, that was that neighborhood behind the Rock and Pig. Remember they had that covenant back
Yeah,
there?
we can't,
right,
we looked at that, and they also had the covenant up on East Mountain when we had those gals do it. And what I was told was that if the neighbors want to get a lawyer
right.
and sue, they can do that, but it has no bearing on what
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah, well, the reason why I was bringing it up is because that's one thing that the state did with this recent code, and I was trying to find the number, but I haven't found, where it specifically defines restricted covenants in subdivisions, and it upheld it, saying that that's the only thing that the state level would restrict anybody from doing a tourist lodging if it was prohibited in the covenants of the subdivision.
I think that's great.
You know, I think it's great too, but it's just, the problem, I was wondering if do we know what subdivisions and which ones have restrictive covenants?
I know that East Mountain does, and I know that the Thomas Drive does.
Okay, there are a few, yeah, I think.
I'm sure that Pinecrest,
Yeah, and Pines, I think, does well,
Pines.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I don't know of any others.
okay. No, I'm just curious because that's one thing that, regardless of what, what we would do, it would hit a wall right there. So it would be kind of like behoove the city if they knew, okay, here's the addresses that are in these restricted covenances and know not to give a license to those. I mean, that's right.
No, I've been advised that's a civil matter.
So
So
it's
that those are contracts with private individuals.
Okay.
It's just like when you have a mediation agreement between two parties that does not involve the
Right.
city. If we grant them something they weren't supposed to in that mediation, yeah, that other person can sue them, but the city's not liable. That's
I
an
got it.
agreement between private individuals.
Okay.
That's the advice I've been given by the city attorney.
I know when we were in Texas, we lived in a neighborhood that had,
Yeah.
a whole set of rules. And
Right.
it had to all legally be signed and everything, so,
Okay.
Yeah.
That was the only thing I could think of, as far as somebody that pops up and we say, okay, there's an ability now to give someone a new license that never had one before, and here's the location. I guess that's one of the things that somehow, they would, but like I said, if it's not the city's responsibility, then, I guess that maybe the buyer beware,
Well, they would have to apply for CUP. They'd have to send out all the notices to the neighbors, so they would be notified.
Right,
I think the situation we get into is the parking.
right. Oh, yeah, that's what I mean.
Because
Yeah,
there's not
yeah.
that many
Yeah,
places that I know of that are not already B&Bs that would want to become a B&B, that they would not have the parking to do it.
right. Right. So that is kind of a given. We've already got that restriction with the cars. I know, that's one of the things that some of the grandfather we talked about before, where, once you look at them and you're like, how are they able to, because they're grandfathered. That's one of the things, but the newer ones, they've got to comply, and they're complaining about the guy down the street who's grandfathered, and you're like, well, the rules aren't the same.
And we have some properties that are legally non-conforming because of parking.
Right. Right.
So, I mean, it's been established for quite some time, so,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, that would show up on a transfer,
Right.
that was
Exactly.
historically.
But we really don't have that many.
No, yeah, I guess that's it. We don't have that many.
We don't have that many, even when you look at, and there's only one bed and breakfast that I'm aware of that we have parking issues with. I don't
Yeah.
know of any others that have been brought to my attention.
Yeah, and that current one, I think, I heard that the, either the fire chief, I think, Kyle, did you go to that one on, I can't remember the name of it. It's on, I guess it's up there by our parking area, our new parking zone in that area there, past the library.
Up on Spring Street.
Yeah,
The building inspector is out of state until next week, but yes, I have set up with him to meet with the fire marshal to look at that.
okay, because that was one, parking is, like I said, in Eureka, that is, an ongoing challenge, but especially if you have a business that
Yeah, but
requires it.
I will say this is where my opinion on this, it doesn't make any difference if you can get a fire truck down the street.
Right,
We've got streets in Eureka, my street.
right,
I got people parking on the sidewalks,
yeah,
halfway out in the street. And when they do that, you're not going to get an emergency vehicle down the street.
right,
But
right.
people are going to park their cars.
Yeah, yeah. I counseled a gentleman the other day who was parking in his front yard on the edge of the road, and he had a brand new truck. And I said, well, I hope it doesn't get hit. And he goes, well, if somebody hits it, I'll sue him. And I said, no, that's not a parking spot. You're in your front, you're kind of providing a hazard to the street. He was, third on the street, and the rest of it. And I said, this is not a, parking spot. And he kept saying that he could park it because it was on his property. And I said, well, good luck with that, But the reality is that, that narrow street, maybe really it's a one lane, but we're doing 2-lane traffic there, and it's scary. I tell people all the time, I said, well, if you can park off of the street, you'll be a lot safer than half on the street and half off the street. So a lot of that.
So, Peter, what are your thoughts on bed and breakfasts?
I'm agreeing with what you guys are saying about the amount that we need in town. Where it comes in the kind of the situation I see is I definitely think that someone needs to live on site. And I said this back before I left town, is that when it comes to bed and breakfasts, and my idea of being in a historic district is that it needs to have the breakfast experience with it, because that's what really differentiates it from being in an overnight stay versus a bed and breakfast. For me personally, that is a big deal for me, especially being in the historic district. When it comes to the Mount, I walk every morning. I walked in through town, and on every single retail shop door, you see help needed, help needed, help needed.
Right.
And it's just like, I just think it's a little too, like a very aggressive approach to progress in promoting more residents when retail shops are struggling to find people to run the shops at minimum wages when we're already dealing with a housing shortage. That's something that I've dealt with my whole life because I've always been a minimum wage worker. And then, so when rent's going up, I haven't been here very long, but people today are still paying grandfathered in from like 6 to 8 years. They're paying $400 a month for rent, which is incredible. That's like unheard of. And if someone has a new rental today, they're looking at minimum probably $900 realistically for a small place, up to $2,600 is what I've heard of.
Yeah.
And realistically, it's going to be hard to fill those positions of the people, like Gwen was saying, about the people that are in town that makes the town special. People come to Eureka Springs because of the people. They come because of the energy of how everyone's laid back and want to experience it.
Right.
So in this situation, I think that we got to kind of determine. It sounds like we're just have to continue that.
Yeah.
It kind of fits with what we've been saying.
Yes.
What you're saying is, if you're gonna take a license for a bed and breakfast, in my opinion, I do a full breakfast every morning, so that's what I thought I was supposed to do. If you're not doing it, then should you really still be allowed to have that license? Or do you say it's called something different, but we want to make sure somebody's living there? If somebody's living in that property too, it goes back to what you just said. Mm-hmm. If it's a huge house, there are going to be financial limitations as to who can buy a huge house anyway, right?
Right.
But if you say you have to live on property and you can become a resident of that neighborhood, if you're in a huge house, maybe you've got enough rooms to go ahead and do a bed and breakfast. But if you're in a 1,200 square foot home in a residential neighborhood, that's an affordable house for a lot of people, but you don't have any room for a bed and breakfast. So all I'm saying is, if it were up to me, I think the most important thing is in a residential neighborhood that you have somebody living there. The rest of it, I don't care. I don't know how you're going to monitor it, whatever. But you should live there. If you're going to live in a residential neighborhood, you should live there. If you're going to have, a lodging. And I think because the requirement is there to live there, I think that takes a ton of properties off the market to even be eligible to do something like a B&B license. But it also has to be policed. And, and again, how much policing are we going to do? We can go and we can change code. And I'm not favoring one way or the other. I'm trying to be a devil's advocate in this. I've been here for 10 years. I've been on planning for, 5 years, 6 years, something like that? On, off, back on again. The biggest issue has always been, are they serving a breakfast? We do show cause and we pull these people in and say, well, you're not advertising, you're not really doing a breakfast. No, I'm doing a breakfast. I have a refrigerator with food in it for people and they can cook their own breakfast. And we allow that because our code doesn't say specifically, this is what you have to do. But then we go and we say, okay, we're going to do audits and we're going to look at this. Again, what is the most important thing and what do we have the manpower for? I think if it's a small house, it's not going to be eligible anyway because they'll have to live there. And there's only going to be some, what will they have? Maybe one room, maybe 2 rooms. I don't, maybe that's not even, doesn't even make sense.
Well, one of the things that, and I'll talk about it later though, with the state, with the health department, their rules are with a bed and breakfast is an establishment offering lodging and breakfast, which you must comply with this rule if it's retail food establishment, is operated in connection with 6 or more sleeping rooms and or more than 10 people. So basically, if you've got a 5-bedroom B&B, you're going to have 6 bedrooms for the people that live there. So that's 12 people.
Right.
They need to get inspected by the health department, their kitchen.
Right. And
And that's something we can put into code.
we do that too. But, it again is who's policing this? We've had this same conversation for years. And it always comes back to, we don't police it here at planning. We can't physically go out and police it. But who's going to do that?
I think if you're a bed and breakfast, we should put in an ordinance that it doesn't matter what social media platform you advertise on, you must identify yourself as a bed and breakfast.
Okay.
You can't
And I
just
don't
put your
disagree
room
with
on
you.
Airbnb
Right.
and say you get the Magnolia room. You have to say the Magnolia room in 5 Ojo bed and breakfast.
Yeah, they don't require that on Airbnb.
But we
And-
could require it.
Yeah, if you find them on Airbnb, because a lot of them will just say, this is the whatever room. They show no pictures outside. They show the picture of the room. And unless you know that they have a room that's called the Magnolia room, you're not even going to know where that property is.
Well, the ones that I've seen have actually listed the name of the house,
Yeah, I've seen
but they
some that
they don't say bed and breakfast.
Yeah, see, I've looked on there too, and there are ones that just name the name of the room, and
It's never going to be perfect.
it's not. And that's what I'm saying. If we're going to have these workshops, let's please make sure we do something that is manageable and that we can actually police,
Right.
or that the city can police. Because it's the same it's been the same
Yeah.
conversation for 10 years
10
that I
years,
know of.
Yeah.
And it's not that I don't think that they're good ideas, it's just, we can do all kinds of stuff at this table and it makes sense and whatever. But then there's another level at city side that if they don't have the people out there to be able to do that, then somebody's going to find a way around it.
Right.
So like,
Yeah, go ahead.
what I was just going to say is, after hearing like the three big components, it sounds like things haven't changed for 10 years when it comes to this with like identifying what a bed and breakfast is.
Right.
But it sounds like over the last 10 years that what has drastically changed is the amount of reducible affordable income housing for residents in Eureka Springs. And the fact of how we can, because we're the planning commission, zoning and planning, so our goal is to just put it in the paper. And then the enforcement, that's not our job to do it. That's something that hopefully down the road as the town progresses, there's more enforcement, so protect our community and protect residents. And that would be something that I'm just paying attention to. So like, that's kind of where I sit is like, I agree. I think we're sitting at a really hard situation to do because we're going to talk about like devil's advocate and go back and forth when it comes to like, we know what a bed and breakfast is versus an Airbnb. And then my question comes is, are you even allowed to post a bed and breakfast on Airbnb? And if is that why they're not saying bed and breakfast? Because then would Airbnb flag them as an inappropriate property on
No,
Airbnb?
I'm listed.
Okay, so you
Or
can.
I'm in the process of being listed.
Okay, is
So
it
you
just
can.
they fear that because they post as a bed and breakfast and then they don't have
It's just
breakfast,
the way the
they don't?
platform is set up.
Okay.
It's a really cumbersome platform, and I just have spent hour after, I mean, I probably spent at least probably 30 hours trying to set up my property on Airbnb. And I tried it one time in 2015, I stopped because it was just so cumbersome. But it's very limited as to what you have to announce. So I don't have to say that I'm a bed and breakfast. I can just, call it a room. When they book, they'll get the address of the specific location, and then I can send them more information. Here's your key code, here's this, here's that. But it is very easy on Airbnb, and I'm not trying to dog them or anything. I'm just saying, knowing how the process works and having gone through it within this last month, it is very easy to disguise yourself on Airbnb. So if it's that easy to disguise yourself, I mean, I have tons of pictures on there of breakfast and whatever, just because that's who I am and that's what I want to show. But if I didn't want to serve breakfast to those people on Airbnb, I don't have to post anything on there. And who's policing it?
Exactly.
Again, that's what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, one of the
Who's
things
policing
that,
it?
in Eureka, I always say this is a complaint-driven situation. Everything's complaint-driven. I always say, the joke I always say is you could murder somebody if nobody complained about it, you never go to jail. But in this thing, maybe setting up some kind of place on the city website that says, if you've had a bad experience, file your complaint here, and then someone could look at those, review those, maybe see a pattern, right? And then start that way. I mean, that way you have the enforcement's based on real complaints. I mean, it's like
Reviews are hard, though.
Yeah.
Because, some people are never happy.
Oh, no, I'm not saying to be perfect, but I mean, if you think about it as a complaint driven, then I think, part of the goal is a good experience, that people have a good experience, they come back, and then you have more revenue because you've got another returning customer, whether it's for that business or any business really. But I think the complaints, if we had a way of making an announcement, on our website says, if you were, given a bad experience or local business did you wrong, click here, right? And then you go in and ask your questions, and it takes you to a form, and that form, basically gets filled out, and you find out that a B&B is not serving breakfast, or a B&B is serving rotten bread, or whatever, right? And then that's one thing we could do, and then basically, after review of that business, I'm sure that, not having a manager on site, things like that, because that's a safety issue, in my opinion. It's basically you've got strangers coming to town, don't know anything about the town, don't know where the police station is, the fire department, and so at least there's somebody there at that building they're staying at that can say, yeah, here's, or things like that. But so I think a complaint, maybe a portal, if you want to call it, on the city website that would allow people to that aren't residents, but they can file a complaint and say, hey, this business did me wrong. I remember having many discussions with major hotels here in town when I heard people complaining about their buffets or their luncheons they had, and the owners just said, those are just disgruntled people, don't worry about them. I go, what are you talking about? That's your bed and bread, that's your butter, and and of course that's what we got to head off is really fraud. I guess if somebody's doing, perpetuating like at the B&B, and they're saying they're doing this, but they're not doing this, where do those customers go?
Normally what happens is they tell all of their friends and they never go back again.
Right, I know, but I mean, we need to be in the loop, so to speak, because we're the officers issuing them the license, right? So we should have some way of knowing, okay, these guys have gotten a bad rating, and we could actually, for cause, call them in and say, here, we're getting these reports. What's that about?
I think we'd have to be careful on that.
Okay.
Because, if somebody wanted to put somebody out of business.
Well, I understand. There'd be, yeah.
That's
But
what I
I
said,
know in
reviews are.
Fayetteville, they will revoke your CUP or grandfather based on the numbers of the neighbors' complaints.
Right.
Whether they're noise complaints or these are actually people that live there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what we do is we don't look at that. We look at, have they paid their CAPC taxes?
Yeah.
Do they have a registered on-site manager? I don't know, but we can't pass something that it's just so much work to oversee
that's
it.
right. Yeah.
Right. And I think the question really is, I think probably the majority of us are in agreement they have to have parking.
Oh, yeah.
We'd much sooner or much rather have somebody living on property, not just pretending to be a manager or whatever. And I think some of those things can be done through the inspections, if the inspections are being done, because, they can show owner's quarters or, I guess some of that's kind of private too, maybe, I don't know. But maybe not so much if they claim they have a manager, so maybe there's some different rules.
Well, I think we've got,
there.
two bed and breakfasts are now advertising for managers.
Yeah.
So, but again, it goes back to, are we changing the code to say you have to advertise as a bed and breakfast, knowing that we've got some sites out there that, you could kind of squeak through without really having to do that? And then how much oversight can we really give? How much oversight can we do?
Right.
And then physically the city do?
And maybe if we cap it, and they realize that if something comes up and they lose that CUP or grandfather, they don't get it back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think that in order to protect our housing, we should limit it to what we have.
Well, like I said, there is a property, it depends on the size of the building, because, there is it the Hadley's house is for sale across from, the big yellow one across from Redbud?
Uh-huh.
That's a big house.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that is a big house.
It's a very big house. So, that one could possibly be something. And then, like the ones over on Hillside, what if it was residential and somebody bought it and they wanted to turn it back into a bed and breakfast?
Well, we approved that one that was sold on Hillside. We did that, even though it was within 200 feet. We gave her,
I
and I think it's
understand.
for sale. There is one for sale on Hillside.
I think it's in at Rose Hall again.
I think so.
Yeah, so, there are a few big buildings that could be turned into B&Bs, but I think, again, I don't have any, as long as somebody's living there, I think it's fantastic if that's how someone wants to supplement their income. I think it's great, because
So
I
do we
know,
want to make it where it has to be the owner of the property?
I mean, in that's another question, because right now our code says it's owner or
I
manager.
know.
And in my opinion, I think it is, only because I know that just recently one sold and they're going to have a manager there. And, I just don't think you get the same, I don't think you get the same style when you have a manager on site.
I have one question about that. Is there anything that we can do as residents and on zoning and planning that can require not necessarily the owner to live on site, but live within Eureka Springs zip code or something? Because I do believe there's a huge difference between a manager and an owner's respect and
What's the responsibility?
responsibility of the property. Manager's getting paid hourly or to do the duties, but the owner actually owns the property. And I think that's the huge difference of why we need the owner of the property to be local in case the manager was to slip up or choose not to be home. And that's like a fine line. And then when it comes back to like adding more, the only concern about that is you just read out that a bed and breakfast could be, it's 6 or more bed or 5 or more rooms.
5 or more rooms or sleeps 10.
And then like
Well,
my
the city
concern with that is like
ordinance
they're
only allows
like
5.
I think the most beneficial, or sorry, I shouldn't say I think, but wouldn't it be very beneficial to see that these big houses could be reserved for big families and that would have maybe 5 or 6 kids that's of next generations of people who grew up in Eureka Springs, so that way they're encouraged to want to be in Eureka Springs and grow up in Eureka Springs. So like I think that when it comes to adding more, there's that challenge of, well, then it involves any average or anyone that has enough money to buy a 6-bedroom house or more has the ability to then take a step further instead of it just taking like one bedroom, 1 bath off the market that only would bring in 1 new resident or 2 new residents to Eureka Springs. If someone was to come in and want to change a 6-bedroom house into a bed and breakfast, it's residential, then that's losing out an opportunity of having up to, 8 new Eureka Springs residents in town. And I believe that the goal of is for us to come together as a unit in Eureka Springs as a community to grow together, and then so that way we have a fine line to then bring together of how to profit as a community. And it seems like there's a lot of bottleneck in that, is just what I'm hearing, and it's been that way for a long time. So it's not like something that's new over the last year or two. So it's just something from a new person sitting on the commission boards that I've noticed.
Yeah.
And I've just lived in towns that this is exact same conversations have come up, but it changes. It
Yeah.
changes real quick, and then when it changes, you can't go back.
No.
You can't go back. So that's something to really keep in mind about it's the charm of Eureka Springs is the fact that people live on site in R1, R2, and R3, which stand for residential, 1, 2, and 3, which means that it's a residence. So I would feel more comfortable walking past a home that's in residential, always seeing at least one person that lives there on site all the time. That's what differentiates a commercial zone versus a residential zone. Commercial, someone doesn't live on it all the time. Residential, they live on it all the time. So I think that's very important.
Well,
Right?
not that we're talking about commercial, but commercial has to live there all the time too.
Oh, okay. But,
Even though there's some that don't think they should, but we'll just
or the
I know.
zone.
stay on
gonna say.
residential
Yes.
today.
That's hey, your building's on fire and nobody's there.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, but yeah.
Anyway, Gwen, do you have another question? Or,
Yeah, well, I just had maybe a little history. I came here in '85, and there were not a lot of B&Bs, and that's when they built the 2 big B&Bs on Hillside, the 2 wood ones. And that was new construction in residential, which was against the city code, but they went ahead and did the 5-unit B&Bs. And back then, the owner had to live on site. And then somebody came to the planning and the council and said, well, I would like to have a manager instead.
please.
Pardon?
They said, please.
Yes. So the managers, so suddenly we can have managers. And then somebody came, and I think I remember who she was, came and wanted to live next door. So the owner or manager drifted next door. So this has been a slow camel's nose under the tent kind of thing, and there's nothing saying that you can't go back to your original concept. And part of it was that you have an amenity in, I basically believe there should be no businesses in neighborhoods, but since there are some, it should be an amenity. It should enhance the neighborhood, and they should be serving breakfast, the person should live there, and it should be contact. There's a new, they redid the Frog Museum. There's no personal contact. It's all remote. The managers are not there. They key in, cleaning shows up the next day, done deal. To her credit, Pat Fitzsimmons, that has All Seasons Inn across the street, and she was offering it for sale, turned down big money from Rhode Island who wanted to operate it the same push-button way without contact. And Pat said, that's not Eureka. That's not, the ambiance in Eureka. And one more thing. Somebody made a comment that a house on Hillside couldn't go back because it was built like a B&B. No, you can rent rooms. Residents can live there. There are 5 bedrooms in that house. This city has a history of rooming houses.
We still have boarding house in our code.
Yes, and so that's something that would provide 5 people that need affordable living. And so don't say that that house isn't good for anything but a B&B. Crescent Cottage was a 5-unit, and that turned into a single-family home. And the one on Hillside was bought as it was a single-family home. Y'all, and I didn't speak up, I'm sorry, let it get a CUP, but now that it's lapsed 180 days, I'm hoping you'll consider not renewing that and let that go back into residential. Let a creative person come in and make more housing.
Yeah, our property could be a boarding house easily because there's a big kitchen. They could share a kitchen and laundry facility and all of that too. So, yeah, there is the opportunity for that in some of those big houses because
Right.
boarding house is still in our code.
So it's
So-
up to you to shape how you want the city to be, how you want the neighborhoods and how the conditions to be. And as far as enforcement, a lot of times laws are on the books and, fussy people will say, why isn't every law enforced? No, no, no. Those laws are in place for the big offenders. So we say, okay, buddy, we have this law behind us, and this is what's going to stop you from doing that thing we don't like. And when you do that, put a big fine on it. You have to check with your attorney, but when you have a stopgap, when Ron Latimer built the big brick B&B on Hillside, the Angel at Rose Hall, he built that building around his wedding gazebo. That's how he got, somehow it happens, like suddenly he's building a building, he goes, I have permission to do weddings, I'm building a building. And every time he built it bigger than he was supposed to, HDC flagged him, and he came in and says, okay, then build it bigger. And he came in, okay. And so he did exactly what he wanted to, did something way out of scale. And then the city had no rule in place to turn the water off. And he just went ahead happily and ran his business. So it's up to you to, I know it's hard, but it's up to you to decide how we want our neighborhoods to be, and they're precious. And we need our people living here, and they're precious. But don't be afraid we can't enforce that. Only the big guys need enforcement. And believe me, there'll be enough bitchers and people watching, and we'll probably get them. But you have to have the laws in place.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm sorry to
That's, no, thank you.
That's fine, thank you.
Yeah, we're going to have to break. Yeah, we'll have to break. But
So I would say we can probably agree that we should have an owner on site.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I mean,
100%.
if
Yeah.
nothing else comes out of
That's
this
right.
meeting,
We
I
have
mean,
an owner in sight. I agree.
I think we're
Yeah.
probably leaning towards having the owner on site. And then we'll have to, and we already have the parking established. So it really just kind of comes down to the marketing. Are you serving a breakfast?
Right.
Your inspections, all of that. And I know you've got
taxes.
that list of inspections stuff, so we could probably talk about that
I
at our
like-
next meeting.
I like the idea of it being marketed, it has to be marketed as a bed and breakfast, because then if they don't serve breakfast, then it's on the owners and they'll just get bad reviews. And if they get bad reviews, then they're going to lose their business.
Right.
And like, and that's not up to us. And everyone's big on reviews nowadays.
Yeah.
And so that's just what, I mean, like Gwen was saying, is that if it's in paper and we're protecting ourselves, it'll protect us for the large cases we have to deal with, not the mom and pop shops that are locals that are trying to help grow Eureka. That's not the problem. I think we're more concerned with millionaires and billionaires that are coming from, like she said, from Rhode Island and places that don't have any idea of the love that we want to preserve in Eureka Springs, and they just want to profit. They hear it's the next big up-and-coming town,
That's right.
Let's make some money on it, and then they'll just move to the next one, move to the next one, and that's what we're dealing with in America.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have anything on that for the workshop?
No, I think this,
You have
at the next
anything else?
workshop, the next meeting. right?
Okay.
Next month, we're having another workshop, right?
5 o'clock.
Okay. I'll
Yeah.
do some
Yeah.
language on the owner.
Okay. How are you, Tom? Been better? Oh, yeah, I know, I had that about 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago?
Dr.
Yeah.
Tishner's mouthwash.